All right, this is going to be really fun and hopefully useful because we're going to model this object in both SketchUp and Fusion 360, or simply Fusion as it's now known. Now, I've used SketchUp for a long time and I'm fairly well versed, but full transparency, I'm just getting started in Fusion. I've started a number of times, but CNC has been the final kick in the pants I needed to immerse, focus, and make it happen. I'm ramping up quickly, but it's quite different, very powerful. There's a lot to it, and by no means am I an expert. That said, I've started to connect a few dots, and in the upcoming video, I'm going to model things in such a way to draw parallels between SketchUp and Fusion that have worked for me, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you. But before we jump into modeling, I found it's actually helpful to really think through how this thing will be used, the ideal dimensions, and in particular, those compound angles a bit more. This will make our lives a lot easier. Now, this will most commonly be used as a planter, water feature, and of course a fire bowl. And the fire bowl is probably the most restricting in terms of dimensions and the height in particular. Now, a typical fire bowl, pit, table, in my opinion, should ideally come in between 14 and 16 inches tall. It can be a little shorter, but anything taller than that isn't all that ergonomic, at least in my experience. Find yourself a lounge chair, plop down in it, grab a beer, and you'll see what I mean. Now, while this isn't meant to be a design tutorial, I'm in no position to teach design, I wanted to focus a little bit on the aesthetics as well, form meets function, and seek some balanced proportions. I found it interesting as I went through this how I preferred different angles as I played around with different sizes. Now, the main challenge here is that compound angle. It presents a problem similar to that found in crown molding. Fitting that outside compound angle is exactly why they have all those crown molding charts and even have special measures and stops on compound miter saws. The blade tilt angle just isn't what you think it'd be. Now, a major variable that comes into play here is something called a spring angle. That's the angle between the wall and the crown molding itself. In the US, at least, there are two common spring angles or standards for crown molding, 3852 and 4545. So to keep things simple, let's just focus on the 4545. Now, you might think that the bevel angle for an outside 90-degree corner would be 45 degrees, but it's not. For 4545, it's actually 30. Wait, what? Yes, 30 with a 35.26 degree miter. And for 3852 crown, it's even worse, 33.86 bevel and a 31.61 miter. So depending on this spring angle, that bevel and miter will change, and this is where thinking it through becomes helpful. We can model anything in CAD, but we also have to think through our tooling and fabrication process as inputs so that we design something that's actually realistic to fabricate. For me, at least initially, that meant being able to set the track saw on a whole number blade tilt. While it could be done on a table saw, and I have a digital angle finder that's pretty precise, it's kind of unwieldy to cut these compound angles this way. Much better on a track saw, at least for me. That's why I want to find a spring angle that is aesthetically pleasing and still dictates a whole number blade tilt. Let me show you some examples. All right, let's start with a Frustum whose side angle is basically the same as that 45-45 crown molding spring angle, i.e. the blade tilt on this compound miter would be 30 degrees. Now notice at 28 by 28 and 14 inches tall, that's what this is modeled for here. At least in my opinion, this neither looks good nor is functional. It looks way too top heavy and like it would tip over. Not so good for a fire bowl. So obviously we need something with a much steeper side angle that again still dictates a whole number blade tilt. How do we find that? Well, the good news is there are a number of more comprehensive compound angle calculators, and I've found a couple that are designed specifically with woodworking in mind. This is perfect. Now, these calculators allow you to enter different values for different situations and compute all kinds of handy information. I've landed on this one at jansen.us, and all I can say is, man, I hope they never take this site down. This thing is awesome. Now, there's a number of different calculators on this site, and the one that I use most frequently that is a real bullseye for this type of object is this calculator for n-sided boxes. Simply enter the number of sides for your object and a corresponding angle analogous to the spring angle in crown molding, click calculate, and bam, it'll spit out all the relevant associated angles for both the blade tilt and the miter angle, exactly what we need. So through a series of trial and error, we can explore a variety of side angles. For each of those, we can then note that side angle, model a Frustum in SketchUp with that angle, and take a look and see whether or not it's aesthetically pleasing. If so, note those various corresponding angles, feed that into our fabrication downstream. This is exactly how I went about this. So let's take a look at a few of those. Okay, the first one was in fact the 45-degree side angle. And as I mentioned before, this one's automatically a no-go, but it's useful for a visual reference. I knew right away I needed something with a much steeper side angle, so I just kept cycling through and jumping around. And then the next one I landed on was this one, kind of the opposite extreme where it has a very steep side angle at 24.5 degrees. Now from the calculator, this dictates a 40-degree blade tilt, very nice, along a 22.5 degree miter angle. Now this one's definitely a candidate, but in some situations it's almost too boxy. So jumping around a little bit more, I found another side angle of 31.7 that dictates a whole number blade tilt of 37 degrees. Now this one's really nice, and I fabbed a bunch of these, even a few jigs to help set the miter angle, pulled molds for a number of these at various dimensions. This one's a winner. However, the only downer that popped up down the road was after I onboarded my CNC. I was really fired up to fabricate these on the CNC, only to realize that I couldn't find a 74-degree V-bit that would automatically mill that 37-degree angle. Now, one way I could address that is with fixturing, but that's kind of a pain in the butt where it's tilting the material to allow you to mill it with a tool or a bit that you do have, like a straight bit, and that tilt would result in milling that at the bevel angle that you want. I wanted something super simple to set up, and after doing a little more research, I found that there are a couple options. One, there actually is a 72-degree V-bit that yields a 36-degree bevel. So I decided to head back to the calculator, do some trial and error, and sure enough, I found a side angle of 33.8 degrees that dictates a 36-degree saw tilt on a 29.1-degree miter. Now, when you model this, it also starts to get a little bit steep for smaller bowls or taller bowls. But when we make them shorter or make the length and width bigger, i.e. a bigger bowl, the proportions look really nice. This is a winner. Now, the other option worth mentioning is custom tooling. I contacted a couple of manufacturers, and it's definitely possible to have custom tooling. Both came in just under $500 for a custom 74-degree bit, compared to the $80 I spent on this 72-degree bit. Now, if I were producing these things directly, add volume, and I needed that specific angle, then yes, the custom tooling would totally be worth it. But for what I'm doing here, this off-the-shelf bit that supports the 36-degree bevel and 33.8 side angle works just fine. So hopefully that was interesting and a helpful exploration into compound angles and some of the tooling considerations. Lots of good tools there to help with objects that are way more complex than this. So check this site out and add it to your bookmarks if you find it helpful. With that background, let's dive into CAD.